We are live.
All right. Welcome everyone to the Rental Housing Committee meeting on June 29, 2020. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the State of California Executive Order N-2920 dated March 17, 2020. All members of the Rental Housing Committee are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so at mountainview.legistar.com, on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube, and on Comcast Channel 26. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral comments during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/RHC_speakers. Any emails and voicemail messages received by 5 p.m. today were forwarded to the Rental Housing Committee. Emails received after 5 p.m. and prior to the close of the public comment period for the agenda item will be read into the record by city staff, and any voicemail messages received will be played by city staff. Now I will proceed with roll call. All right, roll call. Committee member Julian Pardizella. Committee member Nicole Haynes-Libsey.
Present.
Committee member Matthew Grunwald.
Here.
Vice Chair Susan Allman.
Howdy.
And I am here as chair. We will now go into our next agenda item, minutes approval. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide public comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will keep time and announce when 1 minute remains. Do we have any public comment for the minutes? Seeing none. Staff, did you receive public comment on this item since 5 p.m.?
We did not.
Okay, staff, are there any additional members of the public on the line who have indicated they want to speak on this item?
No, there's not.
All right, then it's back to the committee, and a motion is in order to approve the minutes for June 1st, 2020. Do we have a motion?
I move to confirm the minutes. Approve the minutes.
I will second.
I'll second. Oh, go ahead.
We have
Or
a
you can
motion. We have a motion by Vice Chair Allman with a second by Committee Member Grunwald. Staff, please call the roll call vote.
All right, we're gonna start with Committee Member Pardo-Dizella.
Yes.
Committee Member Haynes-Libsey.
Yes.
Committee Member Grunwald.
Yes.
Vice Chair Allman.
Yes.
And Chair Ramos.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, that passes 5-0. Our next item is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any of the member on the line like to provide comment on non-agenda items? If so, please click the raised hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will keep time and announce when 1 minute remains. If a speaker has submitted written public comment after 5 p.m. but wishes to speak during this agenda item, please raise your hand at this time. To avoid duplicate comments, staff will not read written comments for those individuals who have spoken on the agenda item. Do we have anyone? Oh, it looks like we have some raised hands. All right, so we'll start with public comment. I'll start with B. Hansen.
Hi, I'm just here, like I think others will be, to comment on the first meeting. We were incredibly disappointed, and I think you know that. However, we've been working on mobile home rent stabilization for several years, and we're going to keep doing it. This item is never going to go away. I just want you to know that. That's all I say.
Okay, thank you, B. We'll next go to Anna Marie Morales.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Good evening. I just want to remind you all that mobile home residents are still vulnerable. We still don't have rent protections, which is especially devastating during the COVID-19 pandemic. Cases of COVID-19 are on the rise again, which is negatively affecting the income of many. Mountain View mobile home residents were scared, and even during these uncertain times, many are facing rent increases. This is the time for action and to do the morally right thing and give mobile home owners and renters the rent protections deserved. Looking down on, shaming, and excluding people based on what type of home they live in must stop. A mobile home, an RV, an apartment are all homes, and all residents deserve respect and protections. We are not giving up. Be on the right side of history. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anna Marie. Up next, we have Alex B.
Damn it, I wish that we were in the chambers so I could just, gesture to them and say what they said. But what they said, mobile homes are still here. The mobile home community is still fighting for coverage. We're still asking you to do your jobs, not as you have chosen to interpret them, but as they are defined in the text in the charter that was approved by the voters. Please.
All right, thank you, Alex. It does not look like we have any more hands raised. Staff, did you receive public comment on this item since 5 p.m.?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, this is an email from Bonnie Rose. Dear Rental Housing Committee members, I write to each of you again regarding mobile home rent control. I do not want to sound like a broken record, but I would like to reiterate my stance on rent control for mobile home owners as well as renters. I lived at Moore Park Mobile Home for 20 years. A retired senior living on limited income, I moved to my first mobile home with a sense of security to hopefully live out my days in my own home. But it appears with unprotected and out of control rent increases, my dream may not become a reality. It leaves me with a very unsettling feeling. The Social Security Administration granted a 1.6% increase for 2020. Definitely not enough to buy a bag of groceries, nor help with medical and dental care. How will people like myself survive? And I would like to repeat that there is no place for myself to relocate that is reasonable in the Bay Area, like an apartment or retirement community. I cannot move to another state, nor impose on my family members who have families of their own. My mother hit a major milestone of 100 on June 12th. I recently relocated her to a skilled nursing facility in Sunnyvale, closer to me. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, I was able to see her every day. I am hoping to see her again soon when the visits are lifted. If there is no rent control and I am forced out of my home to move to an affordable area, I may not be able to visit my mother as often, which is extremely important at this time in her life and would cause a hardship to both of us. So I'm asking for all of your help in supporting homeowners and renters under CSFRA. Thank you for your reconsideration in this very important matter. Okay, and that was our only email.
Thank you, Andrea. Are there any additional members of the public on the line who have indicated they wanted to speak on this item?
There are none.
Seeing none, we will move on to the next item. And it looks like it's item 8.1, CSFRA regulations, and we have a staff report.
Item 8.1 is CSFRA staff regulations. And the purpose of this presentation is to review and consider adopting resolutions and regulations for the following chapters of the CSFRA regulations. Chapter 1, purpose of the regulations. Chapter 2, definitions. And Chapter 6 has an amendment that we are requesting. So the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act, sections 1708B, 1709D2, and 1709E authorize the Rental Housing Committee to establish rules and regulations for administration and enforcement of the CSFRA. In that, because of that, staff is requesting regulations that are currently incomplete or missing be either adopted or amended this evening. Chapter 1, the purpose of the CSFRA regulations. Chapter 2, the definitions. And Chapter 6, we are requesting an error be amended. For Chapter 1, the purpose, the intent of this is to clarify the CSFRA regulations. And Chapter 1 broadly states the purpose of the regulations and provides context to the document overall. Chapter 2 is definitions. The purpose of this chapter is to define the terms as presented in the CSFRA regulations in order to improve clarity and understanding. This is especially critical for people who are using the regulations to do petitions or to administer the hearing process. This provides all of the information for people that so that they can reference the document appropriately. And then in Chapter 6, Section C7, there's an error that was found related to fair return standards for landlord petitions. It states currently that net operating income shall be estimated in accordance with the calculations defined in subsection C2 of Chapter 6. This reference is incorrect because it refers to capital improvement expenditures, and it should refer to calculations related to net operating income. As stated in the proposed regulations, it should read that net operating income shall be estimated in accordance with the calculation defined in subsection C5 of this chapter using the methods for calculating gross income, subsection D, and operating expenses, subsection E, in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. So the recommendation from staff is to adopt 3 resolutions of the Rental Housing Committee of Mountain View. The first one is to adopt regulations for Chapter 1, purpose of the CSFRA. The second is to adopt regulations for Chapter 2, definitions of the CSFRA. And the third is to adopt an amendment to Chapter 6, fair return standards. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, Patricia. Do we have any questions for this item? No.
I have a question. For staff or maybe for legal, just wondering how is our ability characterized to amend the CSFRA, even for a correction of this sort? I'm just wondering for number 3.
Oh, this is for regulations, not amending the CSFRA document in the charter. It's for the regulations that you adopt in general that help us implement the law. So this is not an amendment to the CSFRA itself.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff from the committee? Nope. No. Okay. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Can we resolve to adopt all 3 at once, or do we have to vote on each one?
Karen?
So there are 3 separate resolutions, so we would prefer that you do them as 3 separate motions.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to go to public comment on this item. Would any of the members of the public on the line like to provide public comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will keep time and announce when 1 minute remains. If a speaker has submitted written public comment after 5 p.m. but wishes instead to speak during this agenda item, please raise your hand at this time. To avoid duplicate comments, staff will not read written comments for those individuals who have spoken on the agenda item. Do we have any? It looks like we have 1 hand raised. We can go with that. Alex B.
You should be unmuted, Alex.
Oh, now can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I had a hardware mute on. Okay, let's go back to that's me. Okay. I would just like to read an excerpt from Exhibit A of the resolution to adopt regulations for Chapter 2, which is item S, rental unit, any building, structure, or part thereof, or land appurtenant thereto, or any other rental property, rented or offered for rent for residential purposes, together with all housing services connected with use or occupancy of such property, such as common areas and recreational facilities held out for use by the tenant. And also, covered rental units, all rental units not specifically exempted by this article. Those are the definitions that you are voting on right now that are the basis for the charter amendment and the regulations that you are allowed to adopt about the charter amendment, to serve the purposes of the article, which is to protect communities and stabilize rent. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I do not see any other hands raised. Andrea, did you receive public comment on this item since 5 p.m.?
We have not.
Okay. Andrea, are there any additional members of the public on the line who have indicated that they want to speak on this item? I do not see any. All right, so we'll bring it back to the committee where a motion will be in order. Don't all hop in at once. Oh, I have a hand raised by Vice Chair.
I move to adopt regulations for Chapter 1, purpose of the CSFRA regulations.
We have a motion by the Vice Chair. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
With a second by Committee Member Haynes Livesay. So we'll go to a roll call vote. Andrea, if you will.
I will begin with Committee Member Pardo DeZella.
Aye.
Committee Member Haynes Livesay.
Aye.
Committee Member Grunwald.
Aye.
Vice Chair Almond.
Aye.
And Chair Ramos.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. It looks like we're due for another motion. We have 2 more of these. Vice Chair, you still have your hand raised. Did you want to talk?
I was going to let somebody else make the motion, but I'll if nobody else is going to speak up, I'll move to adopt regulations for Chapter 2, definitions of the CSFRA regulations.
We have a motion by the Vice Chair Alman. Do we have a second?
I'll second if no one else is going to.
Thank you, Committee Member Haynes Livesay. We have a second by Committee Member Haynes Livesay. Andrea, can you call the roll call vote?
Committee Member Pardo Dizella,
Abstain.
Committee Member Haynes Livesay,
Aye.
Committee Member Grunwald,
Aye.
Vice Chair Almond,
Aye.
and Chair Ramos.
Aye. All right. We are ready for our third and final motion from this item. A motion is in order.
I will motion to make the amendment to correct the inaccuracy in Chapter 6.
We have a motion from Committee Member Haynes Livesay. Do we have a second?
I second it.
We have a second by Vice Chair Alman. Andrea, if you could please call the roll call vote.
Again, we'll start with Committee Member Pardo Dizella,
Aye.
Committee Member Haynes Livesay,
Aye.
Committee Member Grunwald,
Aye.
Vice Chair Almond,
Aye.
Chair Ramos.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right. Moving on to item 8.2, implementation of database for CSFRA properties, and we have a staff presentation.
All right. Our purpose is going to be to consider adopting a resolution and regulations for a mandatory database for CSFRA covered rental properties. And we'll start with some background. So due to the scope of the CSFRA, it covers around 15,000 rental units, and to effective and efficiently implement, we require a reliable, well-functioning IT system that is able to receive, store, and retrieve potentially significant volume of data. This will ensure the data integrity, improve staff efficiency, and prevent errors that can be caused by missing or misidentified information that we are currently receiving from either the public or sometimes some out-of-date public databases. In August of 2018, after having solicited proposals for a database management system through a request for proposal, the Rental Housing Committee approved a contract with 3DI to develop a centralized data management system capable of supporting the different types of information required to implement the CSFRA regulations. Next slide. Thank you. In January 2019, Phase 1, the online property registration was launched, which also coincided with the invoice mailing from fiscal year 2018-19. All CSFRA property owners were informed in an addendum to the invoice of the opportunity to register their rental property through our online portal. Property registration allowed the owner or property manager to support the following types of information online. They're able to manage multiple properties, update the owner or property management information anytime that changes. They can input their rental property information as well as the rental unit information, register for CSFRA exemptions, and we also provided a user manual. In June of 2019, Phase 2 of the implementation was released. The second launch allowed property owners to comply with their obligation to submit copies of certain notices to the Rental Housing Committee. Once a property owner had registered their property online, they will have had the ability to submit the following types of documentation. They would be able to submit termination notices, banked rent increase notices, and tenant buyout information all online. Staff is currently working with 3DI on implementing phase 3 of the database, which is the tenant and landlord petition module. So tenant petition A and B are in the testing phase. Tenant petition C is planning to be released for staff testing in the next couple of weeks. The landlord petition is still in the early requirements gathering stage. And I also wanted to note that staff is currently modifying the noticing submittal module for termination notices to include the new Chapter 10 regulation requirements that require property owners to submit move-out information that we just passed earlier this month. And once all of these phases are completed in the database, it will allow tracking and reporting of all the major components of the CSFRA and covered rental unit. Next slide. The CSFRA and its regulations require property owners to submit certain notices and documentation to the Rental Housing Committee to track data and monitor compliance with the CSFRA and the covered units. Staff implemented the database with the intention and the capability for property owners to easily and effectively manage their properties and maintain compliance using one single platform. At the same time, the database also allows staff to collect data and create reports on those same key data points that are imperative to the processing and analyzing of rental property that is covered under the CSFRA. The property registration portion of the CSFRA database currently includes basic information that you can see here on the screen. So this would include the property owner information, the manager information, and a short unit summary of the types of units on the property. So once this registration is complete, a property owner then would have the ability to utilize the database for other purposes, including the noticing, which we'll talk about next. So we currently request that owners review or submit this information at the beginning of each year to ensure the information is accurate, and we again send all that information out with their invoices on January 1. The database, again, also allows for property owners to submit those notices that are required. So currently, the per unit data information, we only require that they submit the unit number to be able to upload the notices. However, we have these other fields optional. If they wanted to use the database to its fullest capacity, they could track their tenants' information within our database. So requiring this other type of information would allow for data collection on the unit type, the occupant type, tenant turnover and vacancy rates, base rent amounts, AGA rates, the amount of AGA applied to the unit, and also the allowable amount of AGA that's been banked for future use. So this could provide many of those data points that we are currently sometimes looking for and do not have available to us. So some additional features, also as part of phase 2, we were able to design a bulk email template and have the ability to generate ad hoc reports based on specific search criteria. So the bulk email feature is currently largely unusable because of the lack of registration. So we don't have very many owners' emails, so we can't really take advantage of that feature. And also once we expand to have the tenant portal, we'll be able to do both emails for both tenants and landlords. Right, the ad hoc report feature is currently only used, is currently only used to generate reports on required documentation such as banked rent increase notice or termination notices. However, the ad hoc report feature has the potential to search and create reports on any data point that we require be entered into the system. So again, a mandatory database would allow staff to run reports on all of those databases, such as partially or fully covered rental units, AGA rent increases, vacancy rates, and so on. So as you can see here, sort of an overview of other rent stabilization jurisdictions. And in the second column of the chart, you'll see all but one of the rent stabilization jurisdictions actually require registration. They are not all online, but most of them are required. And they do require the owner and manager information at the least, but as you'll see, most of them do require some per unit detail information as well. And the city there, San Francisco, that does not have mandatory registration is currently looking into creating an online registry. They're just not there yet. So in jurisdictions with mandatory registration, property owners who fail to register their property are prohibited from issuing rent increases. And likewise, if the Rental Housing Committee adopts mandatory registration, any property owner who does not register would be considered not in compliance with the law and not able to increase rents or file petition for upward adjustment of rent. While the CSFRA database has the capacity to collect a robust amount of key data related to CSFRA units, it is currently heavily underutilized. A fully populated database is key to effectively and efficiently running all components of the CSFRA program for these reasons. It would allow for greater compliance with the CSFRA, so requiring property owners to submit rental information serves the purpose of making lawful rent levels transparent to both the tenant and the property owners. Support for the petition process, so requiring registration would improve the ease of administering the petition process by providing hearing officers with clear data on allowable rent levels and other pertinent information they need when making their decisions. It would improve billing accuracy. So requiring the registration would improve the accuracy of applicable rental unit data, as property owners are required to update their exempt status on the rental units and then update any basic information that may change over year to year. And so that would, in the end, also help us in calculating the rental housing fee and providing more accurate invoices, which would cut staff time tremendously on the back end with either returned invoices or invoice corrections, which is a lot of time, staff time between myself and the finance department. So it would also bolster outreach opportunities by improving the accuracy of the end user's contact information, and it would create more awareness and have faster updates for rent stabilization program. And it would also allow staff to utilize that bulk email function in the database that we currently are unable to use. So currently only 31 properties of over 650 CSFRA covered rental properties have registered in our database. With these low levels of registration, the data is not realizing its purpose and full potential. A fully populated database would ensure a full data set, as well as the ability for staff to communicate economically and efficiently with property owners and provide online tools and resources for efficient, accurate, and reliable functioning of the CSFRA program. A mandatory database is also necessary for efficient, timely collection and prompt processing and analyzing of the rental property data. However, due to the lack of registration that we've seen, the pertinent information collected. The database currently only has a limited use. So next slide. We are asking you to consider here adopting a resolution and regulations for a mandatory database for the CSFRA covered rental properties. Thank you. Any questions?
Go ahead, Committee Member Partizella.
Any sense of the fiscal impact of this?
We are not expecting any increase above what we have already budgeted for the database system.
I'd be interested to hear from staff how satisfied you are to date with this database provider, and if you're, satisfied with them or how you feel about them.
Sure. Yeah, we have been working with them for a while now and have created a pretty good working relationship. So we're very pleased with the progress that we have. And we've been working very hard in this phase 3 for the petitions, which is basically all custom work that they're doing for us. And during the testing process, everything is working very smoothly and it's very user-friendly. So we're very excited to have that pushed out. And we'll definitely give you a preview when it comes out. But overall, we're very satisfied.
Yeah, I would like to second that. They have done phenomenal work for us, and they really are building a lot of these systems in a way that I don't necessarily think that they were initially anticipating. They're far more custom than they, I think, originally meant them to be, which was kindness in the way the contract was worded, I'd say. So we are getting a user-friendly product that I'm, with the petition side of it, exceedingly happy with. And the more that we complete each type of petition, I would say that even the happier I am. So, and especially for the cost, we're receiving really good service from the staff's perspective.
Do we have any other questions for staff? Vice Chair Allman, it looks like you raised your hand. You need to unmute yourself.
I was informed that the YouTube is broken, that it's not streaming. So I just wanted to pass that on to whoever can correct that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're working on it here, so I'm sorry for any inconvenience causing. Our IT director is on his way to City Hall to try to figure it out. So hopefully it will be up soon.
All right. It looks like Committee Member Grunwald has his hand up.
Sure, thank you. I just had some questions for staff, going through the details. First, we covered compliance rate, or the percentage of buildings that have paid, a few meetings ago. And if we exclude kind of outliers like buildings that are in litigation or buildings who are objecting to the fee, what's our compliance rate right now on buildings that are paid up?
I haven't pulled the latest numbers, I think since our last meeting, but I know we're pretty high on the compliance rate for the fee, and at least on that part. But again, they're not required to pay the fee through our website, so they can just pay the fee directly with the city. So it's not really linked to the registration compliance.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to ascertain, do we perceive that we would get increased compliance or increased payment through having at least the mandatory registration of the building?
I really think we do. when registering, apart from the billing, there are other criteria that the landlords need to comply with, and those can be then monitored through the database.
And which parts specifically, Anki?
It's providing certain notices that Andrea just pointed out in her presentation. It is checking whether they correctly applied the AGA on the rental units. And we also would like to track the vacancy rates, because that is a data point that we do need to monitor according to the CSFRA.
And currently the vacancy rate that we're using is from Star.
Yeah,
okay.
CoStar.
Yep.
It's a data firm.
And then
I do want to, and
sure.
one of the key pieces that Andrea works very hard on is to ensure that the billing addresses are correct. Every year she has to go back and redo that work, and it is a ton of staff work to do that.
Yeah.
Like significant staff work. And this, having a mandatory database would alleviate a lot of that work. It is, to be honest, one of the heaviest lifts that we have every year. It's a lot of work.
Thanks. And could you
I was just going to point that out.
Yeah, thanks. And Andrea, maybe if you could give some more detail, I'm just trying to wrap my head around. So I was kind of under the assumption that many addresses wouldn't change year over year. I mean, are we, or that we would get better information each year that we had, that the CSFRA had been in place, and that some of the returned invoices, hopefully that number would decrease over time. Is that like, yeah, if you could tell me more about that process each year, give me a sense of how, you know, how much, yeah.
Right, yeah, and so we took on a little bit more of that this year, instead of leaving it into finance's hands, because this is the way we worked it out. If we wanted to do more complete follow-ups with invoices that haven't been paid, we needed to sort of do all that research on our own and send out those follow-up invoices on our own. So it's a huge lift. So we send the invoice out on the 1st, and people are supposed to pay by the 1st of February. We do get a lot of return addresses. So that is probably the thing that takes the longest, because you don't know really why it's returned, if it's the owner has changed or just the address is incomplete in some way. So you're doing a lot of hunting down and trying to figure out what is an alternative address to mail to, and then many times the email that, or the mailing address that you found is also incorrect, so they come back a second time, and then you're trying to find, you know, with different departments in the city, if anybody has a new address for them. So it's just a lot of hunting down, collaborating with other departments, and trying to find the right addresses. If anybody has a phone number, so we can call them, sort of that type of thing.
I don't know how grant this could be.
To get these invoices paid. And it does pay off, because we do end up with a pretty significant, you know, rate of people who do pay their invoices, but it's a lot of work.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to ascertain, I guess, once we've found them. So I do, I'm sure that it is tough to initially find someone who, you know, we have an old address for, or, you know, doesn't live there anymore and is managing the property remotely. I guess the question is, tell me a little bit more about how the registration process will help in the kind of searching for those, helping with the returned invoices.
Right. Well, so hopefully there will be very few. If the landlord or their property owner is going in and updating their mailing address every year, we would pull directly from our database to address these invoices, and it should be going to their correct mailing address at that point.
Got it. And currently we're pulling, sorry to keep going down, currently pulling from the property tax registration rolls, is that right?
Pulling from a mixture of our multifamily housing database and the county database. And when that fails, then we pull from the utility billing database in finance. And when that fails, we try to see if anybody else has an address we can use.
No one's been in.
And for the buildings that we have to do that search on, is that number decreasing year over year?
So that's another reason why I pulled that task more into the CSFRA team, because finance was doing a lot of that follow-up and they weren't sharing some of the information with us about returned addresses. So I didn't have a good idea of how big that number was until I asked to see it this year. And I was surprised by the amount of returned mail. But yeah, I wanted us to also make sure that we're correcting the addresses and have a better idea of what we were up against. So.
Okay, and then maybe a question for, or thank you, Andrea, that's helpful. A question for maybe Karen. Would we legally be able to, if we had email addresses and we had like a paperless opt-in via the website, we created a separate field, would we be able to forego sending paper invoices? Or I mean, is there a way that we can make this more efficient legally without having to send a paper?
Yeah, and I think the way the regulations are written, everything can be done online. You know, the billing right now, as Andrea said, is done through the city billing. So we might have to coordinate with them. And, you know, Andrea, you would need to work with the database providers to see if they could pay the fee online. But I think the goal is to try to make it paperless, but we will provide paper registration for those people that don't feel comfortable with the online.
Got it. And then legally, the question of them not, let's say someone is late or we had trouble finding someone and they raise the rent prior to February 1st or some deadline where we said that if they're not in compliance, they couldn't raise the rate. Then do tenants, how would it work if it is an honest mistake and we're having trouble finding somebody? How would it work if they had raised rents not knowing they were not in compliance about this new rule that we would pass? You know, would they have to go back and refund for the amount of time that they were not in compliance? Like, how would that?
Well, I think it would work the same way it works now. If a property owner takes a rent increase to which they're not entitled, it's a complaint-based system. So the tenants would have to file a petition that the rent increase was not allowed. And it would be up to the hearing officer to determine, you know, if funds were owed to the tenant.
I see. And Anki, in this agenda item, we wouldn't have the regs written yet. This is just explorational.
No, actually, they're part of your package.
Okay. In that, then I didn't read the section on how we would, what would happen if somebody was not in compliance, and specifically, it said in the summary that they couldn't raise rent. But could you expand upon what the current regs say about that?
Sorry, about what?
Specifically about the inability to essentially raise any rent if they're not in compliance, if they haven't registered.
Well, currently we don't have any regulations for that. So there is nothing in the regulations about that. So what we're trying to accomplish is to have some regulations that say that registration is part of your duties under the CSFRA, and failure to complete the registration shall be deemed substantial non-compliance. That doesn't mean that the landlord who just forgot to register, although we will send out reminders during the year, cannot just say whenever he's confronted with that, he can just go in and correct that problem the next day and then raise the rents.
Yeah, I think I'm more concerned that for landlords who don't, I guess first we'd still have the paper option, or currently we're using the paper option, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah, they can always.
I guess everybody's already.
us.
I mean, everyone's already registered. Everyone today, out of the 650 buildings, or sorry, that number may be lower, but today in the system we have 650, and that we say is total?
Yeah, around 650 properties are covered under the CSFRA. And so we gathered our own information and used the best information we have to put that in the database ourselves. But we want landlords to go in and check that information and make corrections where necessary. If each landlord were to do that for their property, it would relieve staff from so many hours of work, firstly. Secondly, it would prevent staff from sending out invoices to the wrong address or the wrong landlord when properties are getting sold. And things would, run way more smoothly than they have been so far.
Thank you. I think it was specifically if those properties are registered today, is there how would they get out of compliance if they had moved and not notified us? I'm just trying to figure out what are we
So
defining as registration for properties that are kind of already in our paper database today?
Yeah, so we don't have a paper database, we have an online database. And they we ask for them to update their information once per year.
And can I just, so the regulations also provide, like, if the property changes hands, they are supposed to update the information within 30 days. So the idea is to keep it up to date, but then as Anki said, at least annually, property owners should be updating the information.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think I had a couple other questions, so I'll just, well, actually, Emily, is that okay, or does anyone else have questions right now?
It looks like committee member Haynes Livesay has her hand up, but if she wants to go now, that's fine. If she doesn't mind you continuing on with your questions, that's fine too.
You can continue if you want, and I'll ask after you're done. It's okay.
Okay, thank you. When it comes to the per unit, mandating per unit details, what would be perceived as the key benefits of requiring that information? That's a question for staff.
Well, as you know, in our monthly status report, you've requested some very specific information, including unit turnover, which we do not have accurate data on other than the census. It would provide that information. It would also provide accurate vacancy rates. We don't have accurate vacancy rate information. And the way that the CSFRA is written, we would have to do a survey, a paper survey of some sort, to gather the information for vacancy rates if we were to look at potentially be suspending the CSFRA. That we can constantly track it with the database. Your database already has all of these functions. We're just not able to utilize them. You're paying for it. It's a robust system that works very well. We just don't have the ability to get the data. So we would also know rent rates. We would be able to track what increases people are actually giving. We would know thoroughly if people have provided rollbacks, if people are in compliance. We don't have the ability to know if people are in compliance with their buildings and their properties at this point. All of that information is a question mark. This would provide all of that to us, and we would be able to know what the actual rent rates are for these units, so we can tell people specifically right now. So when you look at your monthly status report right now, it shows the market rate rent, which is what's on the market currently. It doesn't show what people are actually paying and whether or not our ability to stabilize rents for the people who currently live in the units is actually working. We don't have a way to know any of that information. And having a mandatory database that shows per unit information does that. Plus we would be able to break data down into better data sets, and we would be able to tell you specifically of the covered units, this many are, one bedrooms with rent below $1,000. This many are one bedrooms with rent below $1,500. This many are, we would be able to tell you who's even below the HUD rates. We would have the ability to actually know what people are actually paying, which is actually pretty important for the purpose of the CSFRA. Just thinking, you know, all of the terminations that we track, we can continue to track those as thoroughly as possible, but we can also know when there's unit turnover, why people are moving out. We don't currently require information for all units when there's turnover, only if termination notices are submitted. We would now know, okay, this unit has turned over 5 times. So we can actually say in a 5-year span, there's been this much turnover. And we also can see the changes in rent for the units over time. So it would provide a lot of information that we currently can't access in any way.
Thank you. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of more data. I think maybe on the other side, what would be the cost to a property manager who's managing a 50-unit building? The level of investment, I guess, in supplying this data.
Mm-hmm. That is understandable, but we do have features in the database where they can just download an Excel sheet and they're done with it once they log in.
And they also
Thanks.
wouldn't have to input all that information every year. They would just have to update, once they do the initial lift, they would just have to update and upkeep that either once a year or throughout the year.
Thanks. And so are we requiring that they update it at point of whenever someone vacates? And is there also a time frame in there that they have to update it within X number of days?
When the unit is re-rented, within 30 days, they're supposed to update.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Just a couple more that I had in my notes here. Who would have access to the data? Like, would this be if someone, you know, in the public made a Freedom of Information Act request? You know, to what extent would they get access to per unit or building information?
So the data is public, so it's all a public record. Sorry, I have a little visitor here.
But we do say that we always take out all personal information when we provide data. But
would we publish then the address of the building? So building X has 100 units, then you have the rents for all units and the address of the building?
Yeah, I think the address is not sensitive data.
Okay, and so for the 2 holdout jurisdictions that were on the list, were they exploring just mandatory registration or also per unit details?
So there's just San Francisco doesn't require. The other one was Oakland, which does require registration, but it's only the owner and manager information right now. But they are actively in the process of getting an online database and having it mandatory with owner, manager, and per unit information. We've been talking a lot about databases directly with Oakland, so they're working on that as we speak.
Okay, thank you for your patience. I'll cede the floor to Nicole.
Hello. I was surprised when I read the report by how low our adoption rates are. Like, they're incredibly low. And, you know, I know some people are just not going to want to adopt an electronic tool, but in my experience with trying to transition people from paper to online, which I have done many times, there's normally a much higher percentage of people who are interested in adopting an electronic solution. So do we have any idea why we're seeing such low adoption rates? Like, what outreach we've done, why folks are just not taking to it?
And it's not just that we are moving from paper to online, it's moving it from a voluntary database to a mandatory database, whether they fill it out online or on paper. And just because they don't have to, they don't. I think it's that easy.
So we just think that folks are aware of it. Our landlords know that the database is out
Absolutely.
there.
Oh yeah,
and they're
we
just
have,
saying, yeah, we're just not going to use it.
Yeah, we send
Okay.
out 6 every half year. There's a newsletter with updates, it goes to landlords. We send separate letters to landlords. Every January they get an invoice, and we put our link on there, and the benefits of registering their property. Yeah, so it's not that we haven't done any outreach.
A specific postcard went to all of them with, again, all of the benefits of it as well. We've done workshops specifically on registering, interactive ones where people can join us and participate. We can help them. And we actually have another one of those scheduled. It'll be remote, but they can join us. And Andrea, for all of the work that she's done with landlords regarding termination noticing, that's where the ones that are registered come from, is from when people have to file termination notices with us. And so she's worked with them to help them walk through any of the challenges that they might have. So you see compliance when they're required to utilize the system.
Okay. And in the workshops and whatnot, we haven't heard like, oh, I have a hard time with understanding how to upload. Like, I just am thinking about myself, and it just boggles my mind that if I had an electronic solution to get something done that is a fee I know I have to pay every year, that I wouldn't adopt it and just go with the electronic solution rather than play cat and mouse to pay the fee. But maybe I'm just more amenable to fee paying. We haven't heard like a Emily, don't laugh. We haven't heard like an overarching rationale in any of the workshops of why we're not getting people to adopt this. No. Okay. All right. That was my questions.
All right.
As a follow-on, though, I guess to go back to your question, fee paying is not, and maybe Andrew, this is a question for you. Like fee paying, we're in the high 90s, right, percent-wise, on like how many buildings have paid their fee, right?
Right.
Okay, so I mean, Nicole, I'm equally perplexed, I guess, in that. But it sounds like it's to clarify from staff, it's a unwillingness to register online, but they're still, via the paper route, they're still paying the fee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they can pay the fee online through the city website. I don't know numbers on percentages of who pays in person versus online. That's a finance department question, but they have the option to pay online, and I believe many of them do.
But our system and the finance system, I think last time we talked about this, they don't really talk to each other, and it would be fairly expensive to kind of do that, right?
Right, yes, but we did decide to just go ahead and have a link on our system which says pay fee, and then they click on that and it just takes them directly to the site for the city. So it will be available there.
So maybe if we adopt these regulations, we could have like a register and then pay fee button. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Do we have, oh, it looks like Vice Chair Allman has some questions.
You're on mute.
I got it. I wanted to confirm the number because it's so outrageous. We only have 31 that have registered out of 600. Is that correct?
That is
okay,
correct.
That really begs that we make this mandatory. We're just not getting all the information that we need. Mm-hmm.
Was that it for your questions, Vice Chair?
Yes.
Okay. I had a brief question about the 31 out of the 650 who have registered. Are those mostly large or small landlords? Or large properties or small properties? There's no such thing as like a large landlord or small landlord.
To be honest, about half of them are properties that have registered as exempt. So those are usually larger, you know, affordable housing complexes that are just exempt from the CSFRA altogether. So about half then are really only CSFRA covered units. So the number is even about half of that, realistically. And there's a mix. It's a lot of larger properties because they're serving more termination notices than some of the smaller properties. But there is a mix in there of larger and smaller properties.
Another question I had is that should we make this mandatory? It looks like implementation of it being mandatory, or the deadline to actually file this looks like February, I had the date here, February 1st, 2021. Do we have like an outreach plan leading up to that? Because I imagine we don't want everyone coming in January 31st. Do we have, what kind of outreach do we have, and should we make this a mandatory registry?
We've already have plan, if this is adopted, we would send out a letter as quickly as possible to all the landlords. It would go in the newsletter that is slated to go out at the beginning of July, that we're just about done with. And then we would continue with as much outreach as possible, including we already have a webinar workshop scheduled for this particular item. We had just planned it at the beginning of the year anyway. So that would go out, and then of course with all of the fee information that we send out and all of the noticing that we send for the fees, it would be in that noticing. So the way that property owners sign up and get onto the system is through their parcel number, their APN, and there's a PIN with that, and that is how they get into the system. It's part of the billing invoices. So in your invoice, you receive all of that information. In that invoice, there's a letter, and it would have all of that information as well. So it would be pretty robust, and we already have the ability to start getting the information out as quickly as possible.
It looks like we have another question from committee member Haynes Lipsey.
Sorry, one last question. So do we anticipate, I'm just thinking about me and pieces of paper with numbers on them. Do we anticipate that it would be a big amount of staff time in the weeks leading up to the compliance date of February 1st, 2021 to have all the, oh my gosh, I forgot to file, how do I do this? Oh my gosh, callers call in and kind of eat up time and hassle, and do we have a way to mitigate some of that impact to you and to Andrea? Because I can imagine that'll be like really repetitive days going up there.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully with all the outreach we're going to do beforehand, we'll get a lot of people in that first wave. But also, I have created a very thorough set of user instructions that are mostly pictures, and it's very easy to understand. And everyone I send it to has had pretty good luck following them. And even if they have a couple of questions, it cuts down my call time from, 30 minutes to maybe 5. So we have all of the back end information ready to go because we've had this set up now for a year or two. So I'm hoping that will cut down some of that time. And I think also, even if it does take some staff time, the amount of initial time it will take will be worth it in the long run.
Perfect.
And we're very lucky to have the additional support from the Mountain View Rental Housing Helpline and Project Sentinel. You know, they provide services to both property owners and tenants, and so they can definitely assist and will assist in helping property owners register and walk them through that process. So luckily we have additional staff support there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions from the committee? Seeing none, let's go to public comment. All right, where's my script? Here we go. Would any members of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will keep time and announce when 1 minute remains. If a speaker has submitted public comment after 5 p.m., but wishes instead to speak during this agenda item, please raise your hand at this time. To avoid duplicate public comments, staff will not read written comments for those individuals who have spoken on the agenda item. All right, let's see our raised hands. We have 2 raised hands. All right, let's start with Edie Heating.
If you just unmute yourself, Edie.
Did I succeed?
You did.
Okay, very good. I am happy the city is making progress on its CSFRA related data system. Having such a system developed reduces the effort to capture useful data, which supports the CSFRA. Many are thinking of the coming importance of understanding eviction data as moratoriums on eviction expire and repayment timelines begin. I support this motivation to capture data at the unit level. And as you're already seeing, it needs to be mandatory because no one chooses paperwork that's not mandatory. I think this paperwork is well worth it, and the data system will support making it efficient. Every time I look at the CSFRA, where I go is immediately to the vacancy rate. And every time I look at it, I wonder how accurate it is. I wonder, as apartments empty for demolition, how does that affect the vacancy rate? When we've had volunteers out, we sometimes come across apartments that are Airbnb rented. The people there tell us so. Are these legal Airbnb rentals? If we're capturing more data, legal uses are going to be encouraged. I especially support B.3 in the draft chapter 11. Re-registration. Whenever a new tenancy commences for a covered rental unit, the landlord must update the registration within 30 days after such tenancy commences, including providing the new rental rate. This means the database will very largely stay up to date all the time. There will be an initial effort to update it, but then it'll be an ongoing update. That means you will always be getting accurate information out of it. I have one question. Is there a similar requirement that I've missed to document when a tenancy ends within 30 days? If a tenant just moves out and no replacement tenant is sought, this is also needed information. If this is not already required within the regulation, I would add documenting apartments becoming vacant within 30 days as an additional requirement. Then you would really have a robust set of data that really will answer your questions and tell us how well the CSFRA is working and how well it is being complied with. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie. Next speaker is Alex B.
Yay!
Seriously? Okay. Thank you, Alex B. Do we have any other comments? Or was that actually a glitch? Oh.
I think he does want to speak, but I think it's, let's see.
He may be glitched.
Yeah, what was the glitch? What happened?
Okay, I'm not sure, but I think you're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm really glad this is coming back. I think this is awesome. I think this is how it should have been done in the first place. I love that we're going to have greater transparency and more ability to track what's going on in the city and be able to better target outreach solutions and also save staff a lot of toil that they have heroically taken upon themselves in the absence of required transparency on the part of the landlords of the city. I think this is great. I would love to ascertain why Committee Member Grunwald is trying to find any excuse to not have this and is so concerned with each possible hypothetical way in which any landlord could somehow be inconvenienced at some point, given all these counterfactuals, but is not concerned with the benefits to tenants, the city, the program as a whole, you as administrators who would be able to get more information out of this to be able to better decide how to allocate your resources and what you can do to better serve the purposes of the charter. Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you. I think that it should be mandatory, and that the more information we have, the better we can progress as a city and the more people we can help. I am curious what the glitch was. What'd you guys hear? Oh, also the stream on YouTube's back up.
All right, thank you, Alex B. The next speaker is Anna Marie Morales.
Hi there. I just want to say I completely agree with everything Alex said. This really needs to be mandatory. In hindsight, this probably should have been done from the very beginning, but it's not too late to do this now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna Marie. It looks like that is the last of the hand raise. So city staff, did you receive public comment on this item since 5 p.m.?
No, we did not.
All right. Andrea, are there any additional members of the public on the line who have indicated they wanted to speak on this item?
No, there is not.
Nope. All right, we are now back to committee deliberation, questions and action, if applicable. A motion to approve should include the reading on the following items in red: to adopt resolution and regulations for a mandatory database for CSFRA covered rental properties. A motion is in order, but I will allow for some deliberations because I'm sure there's probably going to be some. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, committee member Partizella.
So I think we touched on this before, and so apologies if I didn't completely get it, but can someone just kind of refresh me on how much of this data would be available to the public if a given person wanted to look at all this data? Because I think I understand the significance of the data. My only concern is, people's privacy and how much of it is available to the general public versus just available to the RHC when trying to administer this whole system.
So a lot of the data will be available to the general public. Any information that is personal to a particular individual that could potentially compromise their privacy will not be available.
And it would, I would assume, be something similar to petitions where all of the unit numbers can be completely changed to not be specific to the unit, or the data could be aggregated in some way. There are options in how the data can be provided within the redaction code. So as Karen's saying, the personal identifiers can be stripped from the information.
Do we have, and maybe this has to be by way of modifying the motion, but do we have a sense then whether that actually would happen or that's just an option? So Do we know now that going forward we would try to strip some of that data or otherwise make it anonymous, or is that something that is still kind of up in the air unless we decide now or at some later point to do that?
So we have to comply with the Public Records Act under state law. And so the Public Records Act makes certain information public. A lot of information the public agencies hold is public, but it does require that certain identifying information that either would infringe on somebody's privacy rights or that could expose people to potential identity theft has to be removed from data before it's made available to the public. So we are subject to that, whether we like it or not, and that's how we would manage the information.
So for instance, per unit, like an identifier, we can have a separate identifier for per unit information that is not tied to a specific unit for public information requests. So if you lived in apartment 1B at 333 Made Up Street, no one would see that your rent for apartment 1B at 333 Made Up Street is $2,000. They would see Sparkle Sunshine apartment at 333 Made Up Street is $2,000. So you wouldn't be able to tell whose unit it is specifically paying the rent, just like we do for petitions now.
Do we have any sense in terms of taking that additional step to make it, and anonymous, or the data in that format, so that you respect people's privacy, if that adds another level of cost or complexity to how we process this? Because I can understand if we just have the data as input by the landlords, it's very easy to manage as is because it's in that format. But now if we have to make it available to the public and it has to be presented differently, is that an added cost item that we can try to estimate at this point, or is that just too difficult to do?
We have seen public records requests significantly drop for the program in general. And that we can go back to 3DI and request if there's a way when they do the aggregation of data and provide the reports to make the per unit number instantly removed from the data. There might be a way there. To be honest, it's not, if we download a spreadsheet with the information and we black out and redact the units, that would be, it's very quick and very easy to do. So even if we had large data sets, we can black out that, we can redact that one column really quickly. We don't even have to give it a specific identifier for a public record request. We do this kind of work really frequently, working closely with the city clerk's office to make sure that it's fully done under the government code. I have been doing this now for quite a few years. And in this particular case, it would not be challenging for us to strip out the personal identifiers for per unit information.
Okay, thank you.
And in the 3DI database with the ad hoc reports, all of these fields are separate fields. So it'd be very easy just to go in and take out a field with the unit number.
And Andrea, sorry, quick follow up there. If you received a freedom of information request from someone who's in a building who wants to know the rents of all the units in the building, how long would a request like that take to field?
Well, we're subject to time limits under the Public Records Act. I think we have 10 days to respond to it.
Thank you. Sorry, I meant
it would be
hours.
relatively easy to just go in and plug those fields in with our reporting ability that we have in the 3DI system and just pull all that information. It'll just turn it right into a spreadsheet for me.
Yeah, seconds to minutes depending on the size of the building. It's fast.
And is that something that staff would like to be doing? Sorry, that was a leading question, but I guess like
you would enjoy doing it.
We would love to be making ad hoc reports, Matt. Anything that gives us the data that we need and the information to administer the CSFRA to the best of our abilities is fantastic.
You all do provide me with a lot of great reporting. I'll say that. I'm more concerned to Julian's point. I'm more concerned. I don't think we're probably getting that many requests now, Freedom of Information Act requests. But I mean, imagining that you had a database of all rents of all units in the city of Mountain View, you know, I do think that the rate of requests that you would get would increase pretty substantially. I could see a lot of people being interested in that data, and you know, it's not. I think we're trying to balance. So sorry, we're in deliberation, I guess now. So Emily, feel free to you know.
I would say, Matt, that speak. I think with the information that we put out, people, from what I gather at this point, it's not so much unless you really want to know your neighbor's rent, which this wouldn't provide you the opportunity to know your neighbor's rent. It's not so much the specific data, it's the aggregated data that people are interested in. And we provide that every month. We would just have a better system to do that with. So we're already out there. I have to go into the data sets and pull the information every month for the monthly status report anyway. I would just be doing that now with accurate data instead of pulling inaccurate data that does not give us the full picture of what's actually happening in the city. So I think that while, yes, we could see at the beginning an initial increase of public records requests, I don't see that as a sustained issue.
And I also want to add, we are now paying CoStar for those data while we could accumulate that in our own database without extra costs. So.
But I also think that we can work with the 3DI to establish the fields that would be blocked as public records. I suspect that that's pretty easy to do, so that when we got a public records act request, it would be pretty easy to respond, as opposed to now where the city attorney's office is redacting information page by page.
Yeah, I mean, Patricia has been doing all our redacting instead of the city attorney's office. So she's has special software for it, and she has been trained by the city attorney's office. So she's turning them around on a dime. And it is what Patricia said. In the beginning, there might be some curious people wanting to get that information, but after a while, that will just level off. Just like we saw with the petition processes. In the beginning, people were interested. Now they're really not.
And as Andrea mentioned, right now we have the ability to just toggle on and off fields in the reports. So it's literally just unclicking a field, and then it just doesn't add it into that spreadsheet. It's very short turnaround time to be able to fulfill the public records requests. And I do want to mention that all of my public records requests go to the city attorney's office for review. Just want to state that.
Got it. Thank you. So I guess for the committee, yeah, we don't have mandatory registration and we don't have per unit registration right now. And I see that we are with the outliers. But I would say, you know, maybe we adopt a crawl, walk, run scenario. I do think there could be unintended consequences that could, of the per unit data at least, especially the per unit data that could create more time and headaches. I guess the risk reward isn't there for me. So vacancy rate, let's take that. That's one of the benefits of having all this data is getting a better vacancy rate. Vacancy rate seems to me is primarily would be used to cut short CSFRA or you know, discontinue the CSFRA. I don't think that's anything that anyone on this committee is really, we have not been asking for a different set of data to try to, you know, calculate a different vacancy rate. So, you know, and CoStar, yes, we're paying for it, but also landlords are paying all the fees, and that their budget goes to that. So if you're saying, should we inconvenience landlords to and implement this process whereby every single turnover within 30 days, they have to, you know, register all this information about each unit, as opposed to, you know, not asking them to do that. You know, I don't think, like, when it comes to vacancy rates and being able to get a more specific value there, I would assume CoStar is like in the range. I guess what I'm asking the committee is that we decouple the mandatory registration, which I would save staff time, and I think could save paper if we could went with a paperless option, and use that as our first foray into making some sort of mandatory data, and then the per unit side, I mean, see how this goes. See if San Francisco does adopt something, and then we are the last jurisdiction, and then, you know, essentially let them test it out and see what happens and experiment. But that's where I'm leaning towards, I guess, if anyone else has any thoughts towards that.
All right, it looks like Vice Chair Allman is up next. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I keep forgetting, I'm sorry. I think there are so many benefits to mandatory registration, and I don't see the downside. So I would like to put forward the motion to accept the regulations as suggested by staff. And I know you have to read a specific thing, but I don't have it in front of me.
Could I ask a clarifying question,
Yeah.
Chair? So when you say mandatory registration, you also would include per unit data that needs to be entered for every single unit in that building, and that needs to be updated within 30 days of anyone moving out within that building. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I guess, can I clarify for Vice Chair Allman, are you suggesting that your motion is to adopt the regulations pursuant to the resolution, the Chapter 11 regulations?
Yes.
So that
Yes.
does include, Committee Member Grunwald, the requirement that you re-register when a new tenancy commences?
Okay, and sorry, and another question back to actually Karen, probably for you. So if under the current regulations, if that is not updated for one unit within 30 days of someone leaving that unit, then any increases that happened from the time that was out of compliance, which would be after the 30 days of that one unit leaving, would apply to all the building's units, because the building is now out of compliance, and they may have to refund any increase that happened as of that first day of non-compliance until whenever they kind of found out that they were out of compliance.
So what the regulations say is it's considered substantial non-compliance to not comply with the regulations. And in the CSFRA, substantial non-compliance means you're not eligible for an annual general adjustment. So, but once again, it's really up to the hearing officers to interpret what that means. So in your scenario where one unit is out of compliance, I can tell you this issue has come up in some petitions, and hearing officers have not really looked to the other units in the building when they're looking at whether there's compliance. They've only been looking at the units that are petitioning. But it is
So
up to
not
the
all
hearing
of
officers.
Karen, does that mean that not all of the units that aren't part of that petition don't have to have their rent rolled back? It's only for the petition, the units.
It's only for, so they are only looking at those units that actually come in and petition at this moment in time.
Well, I mean, so for rent control to be in place, it would be for longer term units anyway. I mean, the person who has left, they wouldn't probably put in a petition to say that my leaving was not properly documented, I guess. So it would, again, I'm just trying to figure out if the committee feels like the punishment that we would and the complexity that this would introduce for not having each unit in compliance is worth the the benefit of a more precise vacancy rate. We often don't ask for, I guess, pitching to the committee now, we often don't ask for a vacancy, a more precise vacancy rate or other data. So I kind of, I'm worried about unintended consequences from asking for this. And it seems like a lot of an ask for landlords or property managers too of a 50-unit building. You probably have separate software that you're putting this all into. And then you got to go back to our new system and then enter this and make sure you're on top of it. It feels like we're going from a complaint-based system to me to a, to a proactive thing. And actually that was mentioned by staff, and I'd be interested to hear what staff says about if you see that somebody puts in a new rent and the AGA is not calculated properly, will you then go out and like make the landlord aware of that, make the tenant aware of that? How would that work?
Can I interject? I think there's a motion on the floor, but there is not a second, and I'm not sure we should be discussing the motion until there's a second.
Do we have a second on the floor? If we do not have a second, I will second the motion. So we can continue on talking.
Thank you.
Through just to move this forward. I'm sure the vice chair could entertain friendly amendments or whatnot. But we can continue with Committee Member Grunwald's deliberation.
I would like to answer his question. So he said we're going from complaint-based to more proactive. As we explained, and Karen alluded to that, is that a tenant who feels the tenant did not comply has to file a petition. So it remains a complaint-based program.
And we do not have regulations in place for any kind of compliance mechanisms at this time.
Sorry for I have raised my hand.
Yeah,
Chair.
go right ahead.
So I guess then, Anki, what's the primary benefit if there's no proactive enforcement besides vacancy rate precision? What is the primary benefit of individual unit by unit data?
It gives more than per unit. It gives more than vacancy rate information, Matt. It provides the current rent, all of the rent increases for the unit. It gives us a full, robust understanding of what people are actually paying for their unit, which allows us to be able to know whether or not the rent stabilization law is effective and being implemented in an effective manner. It allows us to know if people have received their rent rollbacks. It provides a lot of information, more than just vacancy rate information.
Thank you. So, I mean, I guess to the committee, it does give more information. Don't deny that, but again, I'd say data without a purpose. Asking for more paperwork, without there's not a strong ask from the committee, right? I see the mandatory registration and that it can make it more efficient for staff to implement the CSFRA. I think right now we put a lot into marketing and transparency, and we have never backed away from putting more budget towards making sure everybody knows. And we have many great sessions that our staff leads to educate everyone. But we are a complaint-based system right now, as the CSFRA was mapped out. And I think that's, imagine we have data where maybe somebody entered something wrong, or maybe it's correct, or maybe a landlord didn't enter the utilities and they are included or something. And we say that we have data then saying that the AGA that they calculated was incorrect. But we can't act on that. Although someone else can go out and then do a Freedom of Information Act, get that data and then process it themselves and then notify, it just seems like a question without.
You always have the ability to adopt regulations for compliance. You always have that option, and this would provide you with the information for you to know whether or not that is something that we should consider in more thorough manner. We do know that there are properties that are out of compliance that we cannot at this time reach out to based on the current lack of regulations for compliance. And this would be a way for us to potentially consider in the future further regulations for compliance, if that is something that you would so choose as the RHC. And I have to say, this is all of the information that has been requested. It just means that the information is more accurate. And as Andrea mentioned, there is a very quick way for property owners to upload per unit information using an Excel spreadsheet right into the system. So it initially sounds like it would be a lot of work, but it's actually not a lot of work for people to be able to put the information in. And it does increase program transparency.
It looks like, is that it for Committee Member Grunwald?
Thank you. I'll just finish by saying I'm uncomfortable with the second with per unit regulations. I would like to see how the mandatory registration goes. That's my stance. Thank you.
It looks like Committee Haynes Livesay will be it. Go ahead.
Hi there. Okay, so understanding that we have some concerns perhaps as a committee about privacy, I just want to make sure that we are all aware, number one, that it is very easy to find property records online. I mean, like, maybe would take me 3 to 4 minutes if I was doing it, and I understand I do it a lot, but for most people it is fairly decently easy. And we need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, not all of this is personally identifiable information that has protections around it. If we're redacting the information properly, we can make sure that this is a database that has value to us without necessarily causing too many privacy concerns. I live in a property that I rent. There are clearly lists that exist on the internet that marketers can buy regarding my rent and my landlord and all of that information. I know because I get the mail here at my home, and it's very clear they know information about my rent and whatnot that is not necessarily information that should be on the internet, but it's there. So while I don't want us to add to information being improperly released, I think that assuming that this information is being protected and guarded and is not available anywhere but here is not true in 2020. Some have said we live in a post-privacy world, and while I don't necessarily want to advocate that that's the case, I do think we need to be mindful of the fact that there's a lot of data on the internet, and so if we're building a database, I don't think we're going to be the first people that have it. In addition to that, though, one of the attributes of a perfect competition or a pure market is perfect knowledge of the market. A major complaint that people have heard or criticism of things of rent stabilization and rent control measures is that it makes a market imperfect because it puts in place price control. There's not complete openness in the buying and selling of goods. They can't change per supply and demand. This would actually take a step towards a more perfect market, because having perfect knowledge of the prices at which goods are being bought and sold and historical past, present, and future moves you more towards a perfect market. So I actually see this as a way to offset some of the criticism that rent stabilization can take a market to a dangerous place or to a more imperfect state by allowing us to have perfect knowledge in our market from the buyers and the sellers, the housing providers and the tenants. That is, in my view, a good thing. In addition to all the data that we get to gather, that is also another reason I think that this makes sense. However, all of that being said in support, I would want to make two friendly amendments to the current motion. Number one, I think that Edie's comment regarding if we're going to use this to track vacancy, we should have we should have in the regulation that we have a 30-day or 60-day or whatever time frame we feel appropriate. Vacancy turnover makes sense. I think 30 days makes sense just to keep it consistent. I also would want to have a 30-day grace period from February 1st to March 1st of 2021 for the initial onboarding, because I have done multiple movements from paper to online where people need to adopt online, and people are people. We procrastinate, we lose things, we are not perfect. And so I don't want to see a slam on January 31st of everyone in a panic mode because they know they'll be in substantial non-compliance. I think we should set the date as February 1st and then give a 30-day grace before substantial non-compliance occurs, just to allow for some flexibility there. And then my question or request to staff is, can we just, because I have concerns that will happen, we'll have an avalanche very close to the deadline, can we just ensure that the resources, the photo steps are posted such that if it's 3 a.m. and I'm in a panic, I can go on there and access it myself and just get registered and calm myself down? Because I just know for myself that would set my anxiety off. I'd be like, I can't find the scrap of paper and I don't know how to do this. It would just be hard. So I just would like to see those posted.
I think did the maker of the motion and the seconder accept those amendments or those formal amendments?
Those formal amendments, again, to reiterate, is that we do a 30-day vacancy. If once a unit becomes vacant, within 30 days, it needs to be noted in the system, and that we would have the 30-day February 1st to March 1st one-time quote-unquote grace period.
Does the maker of the motion accept?
I do accept those. And I think that we won't get compliance until it's mandatory. We can do all the outreach we want. People are just not gonna. And I think that we have to not only bend over backwards to help landlords, but this it's important that we also protect the tenants in the process. So the most transparency, the better.
And does the seconder accept the amendments?
I'll accept it for now. I know that the committee member Grunwald also has his hand up. Also Vice Chair Allman too has her hand up. So I guess we'll go, oh, never mind, her hand is down now. So we will, I guess before we get back to committee member Grunwald, sorry to leave you. I'll go to my deliberation on this. I was very fortunate before all the COVID fun hit that the last the last workshop that our committee ended up doing was the database landlord walkthrough, and it was a lovely workshop it was a great workshop in the library. Feels like such a long time ago, but it was very fascinating to see. It was a simple enough process. There is what I was surprised with the most was a fear, essentially, of it. There was this fear. One of the landlords spoke to, it was Patricia actually, that she said that she was afraid of filing a petition because she heard it was just too difficult. And she did the registration. She came in to do the registration, and Patricia managed to talk to her, and being totally open. She's like, we have a process to like just check to see if it was a viable thing or not for you to do a petition. And I think more interactions our staff have with the housing provider community is better. that's one of the things that I liked about essentially really doing more requirements in terms of getting that connection. I understand Committee Member Grunwald's concern about having all the mandatoriness available. I'm wondering, is it possible to make mandatory the first part that Committee Member Grunwald wanted to do in November? And then we wait and see. That's like 3 months until we do the, till they could add the other information. That gives us 3 months. Granted, unfortunately, it's during the holiday kind of season, but we would have like the initial onboarding right before holiday season. That way everyone can actually just log in. And then we step to February 1st, where they would have, they would provide the individual information. I had the ability to search the other registries. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but I remember looking up, it might have been, yeah, I don't remember which city it was, but they actually had it all online, and how they set it up to make it be all online. They had the individual rent per unit, but they just said unit A of apartment on the 400 block of Panda, you know? So it managed to really hide that information openly. Another piece of data that I always liked working with, that's always frequently subject to Freedom of Information Act, is campaign finance data. And to some degree, it's almost automatic in that, especially for our city, everyone files it through NetFile. We do our Form 700 forms in NetFile, and people can go up and see the forms and see the redacted, and it's automatic. Staff doesn't actually have to do anything to redact that, is my understanding. It's automatic. Because it was built into the system. And that's something, if we don't already have, we can ask 3DI to do. So those are the things that I'm hoping that we could mesh together. And I know that we wanted to take some of these things slow, and there's a concern, and I really do feel that we are starting to honor that. But I do think that it's to the point where it's like time to let our database like fly free, and it doesn't seem like we could actually get people to at least start until like we make it mandatory. I do want a heavy focus on outreach. We don't want to we want to give a lot of time and a lot of ability for our staff to do outreach, and for the housing providers to have any questions. I'm concerned that, so we have 31 out of the 650 properties registered. And I do also worry with Committee Member Haynes Livesay, the crush of people who, because it's mandatory at this date. I wish there was a way we could say half of you have this due date and half of you don't, but that's not fair under any circumstances. Although we could probably like target larger. I actually don't think that's probably legal, actually, now that I think about it. But what we could do is we could pull an earlier date for what Committee Member Grunwald was asking, just the contact information of each of the housing providers, and then do the full one on February 1st. That is a possibility. I worry that might seem too much, or a turnaround. I'm curious to see what the others are thinking about that possibility. We would still have everything mandatory by February 1st with the grace period, but we would ease people in a little bit better. All right, that wasn't a suggestion of amendment, by the way, but I wanted to see people's ideas of that. We will go back to committee member Partizella.
So I hear Matt's concerns, which I think there's a lot of legitimacy to them. I think on the unit, the individualized unit data, I mean, I think there are going to be instances where it might not be frequent, but there are going to be instances, let's say, where you have a small complex that only has 10 units. And so you only have one person moving out every couple of months and moving in. And there's likely going to be a way for someone to figure out by process of elimination who that person is, who moved in and moved out, what their rent is or is going to be or was. And there are probably other instances that we can't quite think of, but because of unintended consequences, there might be personal information revealed. I don't know that it's a lot, but I think it's just something that we should be mindful of. And I think it's the proper thing to kind of think through, because there are things that we can't yet imagine happening yet, but may come out when we gather all this data up and make it more available in one format or another. But that having been said, I mean, my main concern is really subpart E that deals with compliance, and I think that's certainly something that we should focus on, because it completely permits a very overzealous hearing officer to take one specific discrete instance of a landlord not inputting the necessary information into the system, registration information, and then fast forward 6 months later, and you have a completely, unrelated unit or a completely unrelated request to increase rents, and that information or that failure to register can be now used against the landlord per subsection E. And understand in other jurisdictions, maybe that hasn't happened much, or maybe it has and we're just not aware of it. But to me, I think we've definitely had already hearing officers that have been very aggressive about their enforcement of the CSFRA, and we've had multiple landlords come in front of us and tell us, whether accurate or not, that they felt like they were not getting a fair shake by hearing officers, and that they were not given a full opportunity to present what they needed to present, and that the decks were stacked against them. And so I'm uncomfortable with a compliance issue, because I think it certainly has the potential to be misused by a very aggressive hearing officer. So that's my primary concern about all of this. I think with the individualized units, to go back to what I was saying earlier and Matt's concerns, I think the benefits might outweigh the costs. And so I think I might be inclined to go along with that, even though I think there are some unknowns. But I think the non-compliance is an issue that we just need to think about more thoroughly.
Thank you, Committee Member Partizella. It looks like we have a committee member, Vice Chair Allman. You're up.
I understand the concerns over compliance. I think that what we might want to do is go ahead with the regulations, and then staff can let us know when there are things that we might want to amend later. I really want to give the mandatory registration a real chance to work. And if we start fiddling with compliance and other parts, or we decide that we want to half the group to have a different deadline, I think it just gets confusing for people. And I think we should stick with the regulations that staff came up with and give it a try. All the other jurisdictions seem to be doing okay with it. And we just have to trust ourselves that we can make this work. And I think the landlords will get used to it. I think, I just don't think we should tinker with it. And I'd like to call the question.
The question was called, can we still hear from people? Ms. Karen, can you elaborate on that?
Technically, when the question's called, you're supposed to call the roll call vote. I think there was one other hand raised. Oh, now I've just checked. So I don't know if Vice Chair Almond wants to allow one final comment. I think Committee Member Grunwald.
Sure, that's fine.
And then maybe you can call the question.
All right, thank you. Committee Member Grunwald?
Sure, I'll just reiterate, based off of the last couple comments, I just wanted to say, you know, again, I agree with what Susan's saying about mandatory registration. I think that's reasonable. We need to collect our fees. To Nicole's point about, you know, a perfect market, you know, I think there's this expectation that knowing all the rents is, you know, having no one know the rents of all the individual units is benefits landlords, and there are definitely use cases where it does. But then when it comes to unintended consequences, you know, we've had investors come to our meetings and actually say out loud, if anybody wants to sell their building in Mountain View, I'm here, right? Like, call me. That has happened at our meetings, and or at least one meeting. And you could see one unintended consequence of this could be something like someone pulling all the rents for buildings, finding small buildings that where the landlord is actually being, you know, gracious and is under market, and going in and saying, you know, I'll buy your building, right? Like I can essentially, I can make this more profitable than you are. And will that happen? I don't know, but I mean, there's, by collecting this data, using the third party data provider that we have, who isn't necessarily versed in all the ways to anonymize this data in a way so that if it gets pulled, to Emily's point, there's another system out there that sounds like it's anonymizing it at the block level. And let's say our database just decides we're gonna have all the addresses as they are, and it's in there at the per unit basis. And then someone says, I want that information, and it's public, so we have to give it all to them. And maybe there's some ways that we can anonymize, redact, but we don't know. It's a lot to go from nothing to all of this. And I guess what I'm asking is, you know, if we could do the half step to mandatory registration, but I'm not sure if I have the votes for that. So I'll leave it there.
The question was called, and we let Committee Member Grunwald speak. So I'm going to have Andrea, Committee Member Haynes will say, I'm going to have Andrea do the roll call vote.
So we'll start with Committee Member Pardo DeZella.
No.
Committee Member Haynes Lindsay. You're on mute.
Sorry, I have a manual mute and then I got muted on here. I said aye.
Committee Member Grunwald.
No.
Vice Chair Susan Allman.
Aye.
And Chair Ramos.
Aye.
So the motion passes 3-2.
So we did a vote on that. Was there any policy we wanted to put forth to help staff go through this? As staff, do you have everything you need from us in order to move forward?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Committee Member Grunwald, you still have your hand up? Oh, and your hand is not up. We're going to move on to item 8.3, where staff has a report.
Good evening, Rental Housing Committee members and Chair Ramos. I would like to give you an update on the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance. The City Council has modified this ordinance, and it's directly related to the CSFRA. So that's why we thought it would be relevant to update you of the latest changes. At the first, in 2010, the TRE was first adopted, and the last amendment before this one was in 2018 to conform the TRE to the CSFRA. including the eligibility of income to 120 AMI to provide 3 months of median monthly rent and $3,000 plus CPI for special circumstance households. This is just an overview of the changes that have been passed by City Council. So the first one is that the income eligibility has been increased with $5,000. This came directly as a result of previous properties that were redeveloped and tenants were very slightly above the 120% AMI, and developers agreed to raise that income a little bit higher so those people would not be caught at the cutoff number. So this is now added to the trail. The second amendment is that the special circumstance household benefit is now increased to $8,000. And the eligible households are 62 years of age of older, disabled or handicapped, and then the one or more minor children under 19, which was previously under 18, who are legally dependent. Then the third change that was adopted was that the assistance from the relocation agency was considerably enhanced. They get unlimited access to a subscription service to a rental agency so they can keep track of what is available out there in the market. And they now also get extended personalized services based on specific household criteria, their preferences, their budget, the location where they want to look, and other requirements such as affordable housing options, waitlist opportunities, and other leads on housing. Then the fourth amendment in the TREO was that this currently the TREO payments, once a household is eligible, the first 50% payment is done as soon as the application is approved, and the second payment was done after move out. Now that has been changed, that the household might request a second payment upon submittal of documentation that they have secured a replacement, but they're not yet out of the house. And this might help them pay for first month's rent, security deposit, etc. The fifth modification we requested as staff. This is also be found in the Alice Act requirements, and we would like the county recording requirements from current property owners or redevelopers to put that on the county records, so potential buyers or future owners of the property know what type of TREO obligations are on the property. Then there, oh, can you go back? Yeah. And then there's also adopted that there are mandatory translations for the required notices. So the notice of intent and other formal notices will also go out in other languages. Then there was another provision added that in the TREO specifying that the stricter of TREO or state law shall prevail. And that is in reference of SB 330 that puts stricter requirements on tenant relocation assistance than the TREO in some cases. And then there was also a request from City Council to waive a tenant's obligation to provide a 30-day move-out notice. Unfortunately, putting that in a local ordinance, this would not be, this would be in conflict with the state law. So instead, we will put that in the TREO guidelines and as a request to the landlord that once a tenant has found a new place to live in, that he should not be required to file a 30-day notice to move out. But that's just a request to the landlords to allow for that. So I also wanted to tell a little bit more about SB 330. This law went for a long time under the radar, but then all of a sudden everybody realized on January 1st, 2020 that this law was adopted. And this law is a state law is applicable if a redevelopment requires demolition of an existing housing units, and they then must comply with all the specified provision in SB 330, including relocation assistance. And then there is also an offer of a right of first refusal for newly built housing to the displaced rental households. So that is a very new requirement we have not seen in our tenant relocation ordinance so far. And then the protected unit under SB 330 are deed restricted housing, rent stabilized units, units occupied by low income households, and units withdrawn from the rental market under the Alice Act. So that's pretty much, I would say, 80 to 90% of our rental housing market in Mountain View. And SB 330 provides for a relocation advisor that is pretty much similar to what we now amended the TREO for, but on top of the relocation assistance, also moving cost assistance, and up to 42 months of rent differential payments between the old rent and the new rent that tenants have to pay when they move to a new replacement unit. And the tenants have a first right of refusal to move in the newly built homes, whether that is a for sale or a rental property that is being built. So on June 9th, the City Council adopted the modifications in a second reading. And so this amended TREO ordinance will become effective on July 7th of this year. This concludes the presentation. If you have any questions, I'm here.
Do we have any questions for staff? I see no hands raised, so we will bring it to public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide public comment on this item? If so, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will keep time and announce when 1 minute remains. If a speaker has submitted written public comment after 5 p.m. but wishes instead speak during this agenda item, please raise your hand at this time. To avoid duplicate public comments, staff will not read written comments for those individuals who have spoken on the agenda item. Do we have anyone with their hands raised? Does not look like it. City staff, did you receive public comment on this item by email since 5 p.m.?
We have not.
All right. City staff, are there any additional members of the public on the line who have indicated they wanted to speak on this item?
No, there's not.
All right. So, we are back to the committee for deliberations and to provide feedback. It's my understanding there is no action items for us for this item, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. We have a hand raised by committee member Haynes Livesay.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I keep getting muted and double muted. Sorry. I just wanted to say, staff, I think this looks great and I appreciate your patience since I know this kept getting bumped from the agenda, and it's good work and I'm glad to hear about it. So thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions, we can move on to the item. So 8.4, quarterly review of consumer price indices for for fair return calculations, a petition for upward adjustment, and we have a staff presentation.
Julian had his hand raised.
Oh, shoot. He did?
He did.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Julian. Oh, you're good? You're good? Okay. All right, so we will move on to the next item.
Item 8.4 is the review of the Consumer Price Index for fair return petitions. And the recommendation, which should say purpose, I apologize, is to receive an informational overview of the Consumer Price Index for fair return calculations for petitions of upward adjustment. And section 1710 and 1711 of the Csfra charge the Rental Housing Committee with promulgating regulations to clarify the petition process and ensure rents are set to allow for a landlord's fair return. Petitions are heard and decided by a hearing officer and may be appealed to the RHC. On July 24th of 2017, the RHC adopted fair return standards for the rent of primary residence. And in March 26th of 2018, the RHC updated the fair return standards to be an applicable designation due to a change from the Reporting Bureau. And it's in your purview to review and revise these regulations as necessary. And in that matter, Chair Ortiz in 2018 requested monthly CPI updates that are in the report. They are actually only recorded every other month. So although that data is there every month, it's only updated every other month, and quarterly comparisons between the two indices. And also he requested that the housing index be included as well as the all items index in these reports. So as you can see here, we do not currently have June numbers. Those will come to us in July. And so your monthly status report will be updated for that. Although we do not have a July RHC meeting, I will still do the status report and provide it on the website since these numbers are volatile right now. For April, you see that for the rent of primary residence, which is the one that we use for the fair return standard, it's steady at 26%. Same with the housing index at 22%, and the CPI all items did drop by 1%. We have one petition for a landlord petition that is currently on hold due to the current situation we all find ourselves in with the pandemic. We will be moving forward with that petition. I'll be contacting the petitioner this week to let them know that we have processes in place to be able to fulfill the hearing process remotely, as well as have accommodations in place for any kind of challenges in being able to access something through Zoom should people not have computers. And we will have translation services available for those hearings should we continue to a hearing for this particular petition. So we are starting to ramp up our ability to do these, and I am providing that caveat tonight because the data that we have is all related to petitions that have already been processed and gone through our process. We haven't had any new ones that have made it through a full petition process with applicable numbers. Since the data is now outdated, I'm not going to review it with you because there's no changes as applicable to the increases or decreases in the indices. But as we do start to petition, to process the landlord petitions once again, we will be able to track this information once again. So I'm going to skip over these slides. And I do want to mention that we will be taking petitions for tenants as well in the coming months. Are there any questions related to tonight's presentation from the committee?
Sorry, I see no hands up. Double checking everyone. Okay, so it looks like we will go to public comment. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide comment on this item? If so, please click the raised hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Staff will keep time and announce when 1 minute remains. If a speaker had submitted written public comment after 5 p.m. but wishes instead to speak during the agenda item, please raise your hand at this time. To avoid duplicate public comments, staff will not read written public comments for those individuals who have spoken on the agenda item. I don't see any hands raised. City staff, did you receive public comment on this item by email since 5 p.m.?
Have not.
City staff, are there any additional members of the public on the line who have indicated they wanted to speak on this item?
There are not.
Okay, so we are moving back to the committee for deliberation and to provide feedback. Do we have anyone who would like to deliberate or provide feedback? I'm checking. No one's raising their hands in person or on the thing. Thank you so much, staff, for this update. Sorry I got delayed for so long. I guess we are up to the next item then. Last call for anyone who wants to speak. We're good? We're good? Okay, next item. Council staff committee reports. Patricia, you're on mute.
Item 9.1 is our monthly status report for the month of May. I'm not going to go super in detail to this since we do that on a quarterly basis, and our next one will be for the June report for the month that we're in, which I'll give to you in August, but will be available online. We have had an increase in public inquiries, specifically related to eviction protections and COVID-related inquiries. So a lot of those are the inability to pay rent, whether they're looking for and seeking assistance for rent payments through the city's current rent relief program, or they're having questions about the eviction moratorium. We're seeing questions related to that. We did hold our first in May. We held our first webinar remotely, and that was for habitability, maintaining habitability. And actually, it went pretty well. We were happy with the number of people we reached, even though we did not do a lot of outreach. As we ease into it, we'll start ramping up our outreach again. So for the month of July, we will have a lot more outreach related to workshops, since we have 2 workshops scheduled for July, which I'll go over at the end of the item. We did not have any clinics in May, but we are having them. We had them in June. They were scheduled, and we did have quite a few MyMV updates. For the mediations and conciliations, we had approximately 20 or so, and they're still continuing and going well. We had a few banked rent increase notices and a few termination notices in the month of May. The termination notices were just a very few 3-day notices to pay rent or quit, and they all included the information about the eviction moratorium. So as you can see over there in that far corner where it says failure to pay rent notices on the screen, they have dropped significantly. It's been a 94% decrease during the moratorium. We had 1 property that went into redevelopment. It's a very particular property with a very particular set of circumstances. If you're interested in learning more, Andrea can provide the information for you. It affects 4 units, and we also had a few households that did receive assistance through the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance. As I mentioned with petitions, we are starting to ramp those processes back up, but we received no new petitions in that process. And I have received inquiries from landlords, so they are aware that we are starting to do this again. Vacancy rates, because the data is trending from the past, vacancy rates are up just a touch at 4.6%. That is consistent with trends that we've seen for this particular quarter in the past. And market rents are stabilizing a little bit. We're not seeing as significant of an increase month over month as we have been, but also not a significant a decrease yet, although that is likely to change due to the effects of the pandemic. We still have no properties that have turned over according to CoStar for this calendar year. That might have something to do with SB 330. And there are 5 properties that are on the market for a total of 76 units. And we just went over the consumer price index. There's only the one change in the all items basket of goods. So a 1% decrease from 16% to 15%. That concludes staff's presentation on 9.1. If there's any questions related to the monthly status report.
Do we have any questions from the committee members? I see no hands up. I did have a brief question based on the calls into the helpline. I've actually gotten a few more concerns from tenants who were getting, I'm trying to find a nicer way of saying this, that were getting pressure from their landlords about the back pay from the eviction moratorium. I directed them to the rental help hotline. Have we seen any increases? I've seen increases myself, and so that causes me a little concern. So I would like to know if the helpline has been getting any of those.
They have, and they have been fielding them when they receive them. We are going to be doing additional from the eviction moratorium program, additional communications with landlords. We have heavily targeted both landlords and tenants with outreach for the eviction moratorium, but we will be sending a specific letter out about retaliatory practices. We have now on the city website specific language that targets that. And we also are working on additional forms to assist people with potential repayment plans in the future that also have an additional form, a notification form that landlords will have to provide if they are choosing to enter into a repayment plan. And we're going to continue doing as much. It's been requested that we continue to do as much outreach as possible to limit this kind of challenging situation. Yeah, I mean, we can go over when we will be reviewing all of the outreach that we've done for the eviction moratorium in the next few slides. But we are continuing to just increase all of that as much as possible to limit the potential impact to tenants.
Thank you. Any other questions on this agenda item? Seeing none, we can go on to the next partial agenda item.
All right, so we'll be doing an update on the city's COVID-19 landlord and tenant programs. They're very similar to our last meeting, so we'll just kind of fly through them. And then you can ask any questions if you have any. So we'll start with the eviction moratorium. All right. So again, I mean, this we've talked about this a lot, but this suspends evictions for non-payment of rent for residential tenants who are specifically impacted financially because of COVID-19. The biggest thing to see here is that City Council has extended that through August 31st, and they also extended the repayment time from 120 days to 180 days after the end of the moratorium. And so to take advantage of the moratorium, tenants have to notify the landlord in writing within 7 days and then provide documentation within 14 days from that missed rent. Like Emily was saying, we are encouraging people to contact our Mountain View rental housing helpline number. So if anybody receives any calls, please forward them that way to the email or the phone number. And again, they are also working with the mediation program to set up mediations with landlords and tenants for repayment plans. Yep, and here's an overview of our outreach. So you can see we have had 13 webinars so far, and we have sort of been ramping up our bilingual webinars. So we will be doing a bilingual webinar tomorrow night at 6. Yeah, tomorrow night at 6. So we're working closely with our outreach team with the city to provide simultaneous English-Spanish workshops. So we are also attending school district events, really trying to just get the word out as much as we can with postcards, MV Voice. We are in the midst of revamping our short films. We had to redo them because of the extension of the moratorium. So they're being edited right now by someone at City Hall and should be posted this week. So we will pass those around again and post those to our website. And I believe this week we're going to refilm our Q&A video with the updated information.
And I do want to jump in really quickly. I forgot to mention with the outreach for the monthly status report that one of the positive outcomes of the work that we've been doing related to the eviction moratorium, and it's something that we've been focusing on internally as staff, plans for our future communications plan updates, is a language access, equity and language access. And so we will be continuing to provide bilingual webinars and more bilingual webinars for rent stabilization program webinars. And as someday, hopefully, we end up having workshops in person again, we will also continue to have webinars for each of the workshops that we would provide in person so that we can make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible. We also, I do want to let you know, were recently approved for our own Facebook page. So we will be working on that. There will be some challenges that we will need to brief you on regarding Brown Act violations in social media. So we will make sure that it's functional on the back end before we ramp it up and bring it to you. But I do want to let you know that that is in the works. And one of the exciting parts of that is that we do push out so much work compared to other, just internally, it can be really challenging for the people who manage the city stuff to have to also be dealing with our posts. So I'm excited to alleviate their burden as well and to be able to communicate all of the different things that we do as effectively as possible. And this will provide a way for us to make short videos and share all of that content really easily. So that's being worked on. And this summer we are also working on revamping the website. We've had it in the plan for a really long time. We just don't have staff time to actually execute it. So we're hopeful that during the month off, we'll be able to put in place a lot of the changes that we already have mapped out. And one of the big ones on that is that some of our basic pages will be bilingual. And all of the pages, so what I mean by that is that you'll see the content in both languages on the actual pages. And then for pages that are not as formatted in a way that could really work with that formatting, we will have at the top in Spanish, view this page in Spanish, and people will be able to just click on it and see their page of information in Spanish. So we are working on all of that, and that's happening, and that we're excited to roll out to you in the future. Thank you, Andrea, for letting me jump in.
No problem. That did remind me also that we're working on that with the database also. So to continue, let's go to the rent relief program. So we're still going with the rent relief. Tenants can apply and they'll qualify based on their income of 120% of the AMI or less. Just a quick update, the city did receive more funding. So the total pot is 3.8 million. And I believe we have about 600 active applicants at the moment. So the city is pretty hopeful that they're going to start being able to give people a second month's worth of rent. And the average payment is just over $2,000 at the moment. So hopefully they'll be able to provide people and applicants with more assistance. Next is the Small Landlord Relief Program, which applies to landlords with up to 9 units. I don't believe we've had many people apply and no one has been qualified yet, so it is still available and you would contact Patricia directly for that. And the Utility Relief Program ran through the city's finance department, where you can get a one-time $50 credit to apply to any of your utility bills. And again, most importantly, they are not shutting off any services during this crisis and for a time after, in order to have people make sure they have a habitable place to live and water and garbage. So if anyone's interested in that, you can call or email revenue staff at mountainview.gov. All right, and I believe that those are all the programs. So if anyone has any questions about those.
Does anyone from the committee have any questions? I see no hands raised. I did have a quick question about the workshops. I'm always quite curious, is it a consistent attendance throughout all of them? Do you find that you get increased attendance during certain times? Is it increased attendance when it's the bilingual ones?
We have had increased attendance with the bilingual workshops. It does typically range around 11 to 13. We have had community services agency join us with staff one time. That was fantastic because they were able to bring the information to community services agency for the rent relief program especially. So they've actually incorporated a lot of the information that we have in our eviction moratorium stuff right into that, which is really, really helpful. And we are tracking the attendance by day and time. So we have not seen major influxes or changes based on day and time, which is actually really nice because we know that we're reaching a good amount of people by having 2 time periods that people can attend at.
Also, so you did, that's great to hear that you did a joint one with CSA because I remember I tried to go to every single eviction moratorium webinar. I don't know if I managed to succeed in doing that.
They actually just joined us and watched the presentation. Yeah, so they were able to get all of the information that they needed to. And also, I think that they definitely took some of the things that we do and worked it into their webinar, which is great.
That's good. Has there been any thoughts about doing a joint one with them? Because I know from when I was watching the eviction moratoriums, a lot of people did ask questions about rent relief in theirs.
So they actually are doing their own webinars every Tuesday. And they incorporate the eviction moratorium information into those webinars. And they do a really, really good job with that. And we have provided feedback on potential things that they could consider. We're open to doing a joint presentation should they so choose, but we haven't worked that out yet. So.
Okay. Also, I had a question about the bilingual webinars. It looks like that you speak and then you have the interpreter speak. Why don't we have that the interpretation mode that I've seen with the town halls? And
we are actually choosing to do it this way because the content is very challenging to understand. It's complicated content that we have to narrow down as much as possible. And we've found that it's much easier to understand if we have it that way. It would be a lot harder for us to actually have the slides be, I don't know if you noticed, but right now we've updated the slides so that the slides are actually bilingual during the presentation. So on some slides you see the English and the Spanish, and then on some slides that have more detailed content, I review the information in English, and then I switch the slide to the Spanish slide for the Spanish interpreters to be able to then, you know, have the supportive material for the people that are watching the presentation be applicable to them. If we had it simultaneously done, it would be much more challenging to provide the content in both languages visually. And we feel like that's very important for people to have.
All right, thank you. That's all my questions. Does anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, next item.
So the next item is an overview of the webinars and clinics that we have coming up in July. We have one on July 16th at 6:00 p.m. And this is for CSFRA basics and updates, including the 2020 allowed rent increase and hardship petitions for tenants. This is a tenant-focused workshop. In June, we had, just last week, we had our landlord-focused one related to allowed rent increases for the 2020 AGA, and we also went over AB 1482's allowed rent increases for non-covered units or for units that are partially covered. The new state law is only allowing those increases to be 6% this year based on the way that they calculate the CPI increase. So they're using April as their index and we are using February, and in that time, and I think they use a slightly different, I'm not 100% sure where their geographical locator is for that increase. It's 5% plus whatever the CPI index that they use is, and for this past section in April, it was only 1%, which makes a 6% increase. So we had that workshop on July 25th, and it went pretty well. We had people that we hadn't seen before, which was cool. We're always excited when we see new landlords participating. It means that we're getting information out to different people, and that's something that we're always trying to do. So that being said, we also have a July 23rd workshop, so the following week at 3:00 p.m. for landlords to help them with calculating rent increases for 2020. And this will be an interactive one. We have a template that will go up on the website this week for the 2020 AGA increases. It's a fillable PDF, and it is in English, Spanish, and Chinese. And when you type in the information in English, it fills out the PDF in all 3 languages. And it does all of the calculations for people. Should they not have, some of our property owners do not have property managers that can help them with this. So we found last year that this was really great in assisting people. It also calculates all the banked increases, and I do want to mention it no longer has the 2016 allowed rent increase because that falls off of being available to landlords at the end of August. So we also will have 2 clinics for July. They will be webinars as well as these workshops are. And the first one is on July 10th from 1 to 3, and the second one is on July 17th from 1 to 3. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Do we have any questions for staff? Seeing none, seeing no hands. Do we have any committee member reports? I am seeing no one shaking their heads or anything. I guess then this meeting is adjourned at 9:46 p.m. The next Rental Housing Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on Monday, August 24th, 2020 at 7 p.m. I hope everyone has a good night, and I look forward to our Facebook page having some really fun memes.
Thank you, everyone.